is Robert Clapperton, or Bob.
Bob.
Robert Clapperton is an assistant professor, LTF, in the School of Professional Communication at Ryerson University. His research interests include the use of simulations in pedagogy and knowledge mobilization, especially in the areas of professional communication and social innovation.
Okay, thanks very much for coming. Last session for the plenary. Today I'm going to share with you an instructional design project and research project we're working on at Ryerson and go through it. I'm going to briefly go back into the theory that sort of set up the project, and then actually I want to show it to you and hopefully get enough time at the end to get some feedback and some comments on it. It would be great. Essentially what we're doing, in sort of a summary before I get into the theory part, is we're taking a course that is called Introduction to Professional Communication. And it's been a linear course offered in a hybrid fashion where students go to a lab for 2 hours a week and do a series of online modules during the course as well. So the course works in the traditional week 1, we're going to study pre-writing. Week 2, we're going to study positive messages. Week 3, negative, etc. The course is run that way. What we want to try and do is take that course and turn it into a simulation. So create a course that mimics and matches up more with what professional communication in the real work world. I promised myself I wouldn't say real. I hate it when people say real world. It's all the real world. Okay? But in the professional workspace, trying to line that up. So we're going to talk about the theoretical basis of it. We're going to start at authentic learning, talk a little about metacognitive skills, and then talk about something that my research and our research team works on called fixed simulations. Authentic learning and metacognitive skills, it's kind of the goal of everything we want to get accomplished when we're trying to teach and trying to design our pedagogy and create our courses. But back in the late 90s, this idea of authenticity became big, especially in the humanities. Anyone who was teaching back then can remember trying to justify teaching English literature and teaching history. And they came up with the idea of what could make humanities education authentic. In essence, authentic meant trying to line it up with what students would actually use in their careers and in their life. And, there were 4 kinds, 1, 2, 1, 1, okay. There are 4 kinds of authenticity that came out of the research. Materials and activities aligned with the world outside the classroom. The idea of if we're going to teach English literature, that they understand that learning English literature is also about understanding how to think critically and how to exercise our mind. Assessment aligned with instruction, open-ended inquiry. It was a movement away from multiple choice tests offered for literature courses, etc. Things that are not too difficult to put together. Topics of study aligned with what learners want to know, the idea of self-direction, so the idea that students, it's not an idea where we're trying to teach the courses to exactly what the students think they should get, but the students should be offered the pedagogy and offered the course and the instruction in a way that they feel that they're moving through it and they're getting out of it what they want to get out of it. And then the idea of aligning with the practice of a discipline. So originally it was the idea of teaching history by teaching history students how historians worked and teaching them how that discipline functioned. And authenticity in this sense aligns perfectly well with what I teach in professional communication, where we're trying to teach engineers, business students, how to communicate and how to function once they get out into the work world. So all of these things are relatively easy to get set up. So Schaefer and Resnick, back in early 2000s, came up with this idea of thick authenticity, saying that many times the courses themselves were designed with 1 or 2 of the aspects of authenticity in place. And the idea was to try and get it so that you had all of the applicable idea, the assessment, personal, and the disciplinary, all of it together to make the authenticity was known as thick. And Resnick Schaefer and Resnick came up with probably the best form of that is the idea of a simulation. So the idea when we're teaching pilots how to fly, it's best to try and have them simulate what they're doing and put them into a situation again where it's applicable. The assessment's authentic. Did they crash the simulator? Did they not crash the simulator? Was it personal? Did they understand? Did they feel like they were learning what they needed to learn about how to fly the plane? They felt comfortable and confident in what they were doing, and they were practicing it in the same way that pilots did. You know, if there's a sequence of 15 steps to taking off, they weren't starting at number 6 and that sort of thing. Okay, so simulations were probably the ideal way of teaching authenticity, but simulations didn't always line up necessarily with every discipline. But simulations work very well in situations where there's a theory and a skill aspect to it. So in professional composition, technical writing, those kind of things. You've got the theory and you've got the skill that you need to try and line up and match up with. So simulations work in that sense. The next thing in the research, what the research we're trying to do actually, or what we're trying to actually find out, is how well the simulations themselves lend themselves to metacognitive skills. And metacognitive skills, I mean, the real simple way to describe it is the whole idea of thinking about thinking, but we all know it's way more complicated than that, because it's difficult to tell what's a metacognitive skill and what's a cognitive skill many times. If you think about a student learning how to write bad news, there's a lot of cognitive skills they're going to put in place where they're going to decide, okay, what sort of strategy am I going to execute? Am I going to use a direct strategy, an indirect strategy? Am I going to, I have to put sentences together, they're grammatically correct, I have to spell the words correctly, all of these kind of cognitive skills. And then probably what the metacognitive skills in that sense are the ability to take all of those individual cognitive skills and say, am I actually accomplishing what I'm trying to get accomplished? So is the message that I'm writing, I'm delivering some bad news, does it line up with what the purpose is of what I'm trying to get across? Which to us, it seems so simple and so easy, but to students that are starting to learn to write, they get all buried in the steps and the things that they have to do, and they lose track of thinking about what they're actually trying to get accomplished. So in our research, we want to try and see if simulations, which kind of automatically create this second level of observation just in themselves by doing it. So you can imagine if you're in a flight simulator, you're looking at this dial for airspeed, whatever, this dial for that. You're looking at all the different steps of it, but you're also aware of the fact that you're not in a real airplane and that you're actually learning that at the same time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's the same thing with teaching. If we're trying to teach someone how to write a routine message, write a routine request, it's very easy to slip into, well, I need to write these sentences, I need to make sure I have the right subject mentioned, I need to make sure I have the right verbs used, all that sort of thing. But are they able to step back and see that they're actually requesting what they need, which if you've ever taught professional communication, it's a 50-50 chance as to whether they're actually requesting what they actually want. So a simulation, but the fact that you're pretending to be somewhere else, it kind of automatically creates a second level of observation where you, even if you're subconsciously aware of the fact that you're doing something in a setting that's not real. Sometimes I have a hard time getting that across, but do you understand what I mean by that? The simulation itself creates that metacognitive, that's the hypothesis anyway of the project. And I'll get in later how we're going to try and do that research. So metacognition itself, I've already sort of talked about the idea of knowledge of thinking and regulation of thinking together. Starting off strategy determination up through application, through execution. That's the idea of what I was saying about trying to decide whether you're using a direct strategy or an indirect strategy. You're putting your sentences together, you're doing all those sorts of things. But on a metacognitive level as well, you also have the regulation of thinking, so you're planning, regulation in terms of what decisions you're making and word choices, everything else, and then evaluation, which is kind of the key bubble in this diagram for what simulations try to do, is do you actually see, are you able to step back and see what you're doing in the bigger picture of things? So can you actually see what it is you're trying to communicate? Is it achieving its purpose and doing what it's supposed to do? All right, so the thing we're trying to develop is this idea of fixed simulation, where we're trying to create a simulation that has the applicable aspect, the assessment aspect, the personal, the disciplinary practice in a setting and in a context that has the authenticity to it, drives the metacognitive learning, but also creates a digital setting where the student's going to learn in an experiential way, in a simulated way. So I've been working on simulations for quite a while, and I work on them on 3 different levels. First level, foundational simulations. An example of that is I teach a course in digital design where we teach them to create a website and design it and write the content for it and everything. And it's a portfolio. We've all done that. We try to create ways where the students can create material that they actually would use later on, hopefully. So it's arguably, sometimes people question me, say that's not really a simulation, but hopefully after I explain it, you can see what I mean as far as it being a simulation. So a lot of the times they have a really hard time in writing about themselves. They have a difficult time in writing that page that says about me. You know, they don't know how to get at it. So to try and take them out of that sort of writer's block they get from it, I use free writing that many people have probably used. The idea where I say, okay, what we're going to do a project called Brand You. Okay, we're going to create a brand statement for you. Your first thing you're going to do is we're going to take 10 minutes and you're going to type. We're lucky at Ryerson to have a flex lab where everybody has a notebook computer, and we can say everyone's going to type for 10 minutes and not stop. And you're going to write only about yourself. Okay, everything about yourself. So if you start off, I'm short, I'm short, I'm short, I'm short, don't stop typing until you get the next thought, and just try and let the thoughts flow out. If it's a word, it doesn't have to be a complete sentence, could be a phrase, could be anything to describe yourself. And they start typing and they start typing away, and you can see them struggling at first, you know, talking about I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm short, I'm happy, I'm this. But as they get going for 10 minutes and you force them to do it, they start to get a flow going of what they're doing. And then the metacognitive aspect, and what I think makes it more of a simulation, is after they're finished, we talk about what free writing actually does in terms of trying to break that writer's block of how you write about yourself. And go into the idea of, you know, pre-linguistic reasoning and linguistic reasoning. And free writing is probably the closest we can ever get to pre-linguistic reasoning. The thinking that goes on before we actually take it and put it into language. You know, same thing when we're writing a paper and we get stuck on something. We go have a beer or play a video game or go for a run or walk the dog or whatever, come back and all of a sudden it flows because we know that the thinking that's going on for that paper is still going on beyond linguistic reasoning of it. So this kind of free writing exercise on a metacognitive level, if they can see that there is a way to try and access that, to try and to first of all be aware of it, and secondly that they can actually do something that might kickstart that. Then the next stage is after we talk about that, I say, okay, now write it into a paragraph. Take your free writing thing, write it into a complete paragraph. They write it into a complete paragraph. The next step is we talk about how did they sense any connection back to the thought processes that were occurring when they were doing the free writing. And the next stage after that is we ask them to pass it to a partner, and the partner turns it into a sentence. But that's sort of a foundational simulation of what it's like to try and write about yourself, first of all, but also to be able to connect with that pre-linguistic reasoning. Does that make any sense? That's the hardest one I have to try and explain, to try and to get across. But that's sort of foundational kind of what I'm calling simulations. We can argue about whether it's a simulation or not, or just a metacognitive exercise, but it sets the stage for getting to the rest of what we do. Other things are extended simulations. We're bringing real companies into digital media classes, and the real companies present a communication problem that's social media oriented. The students listen in teams, they come together, and for 4 weeks they put together a solution to that problem and then present it. But so it's simulating what they would actually do as digital media experts. But the last one, the idea of, none of those have all of the aspects of simulations I talked about. None of them have all 4 complete aspects of authenticity to them. There's always one missing or 2 missing in each one. So we decided, how could we create a simulation that actually is thick? It has all 4 levels of authenticity to it, and is digital in nature and online, and something that is going to immerse them into a setting that is different from what they would have in the classroom. So I'm going to go now to the actual course and show you where we started here. Okay, so the context of the course, we're running it as a pilot this fall with 40 students. The students enrolled in the course, and what was great was we put the web page out that described what the course was about, and we sent it out at 9 o'clock in the morning, and all 40 spots were filled by 11:30. So it was good. Like students they were taken with the idea. So what happens is they join the course, and it didn't hurt that we started out by saying there's no midterm, there's no final, there's no, and then the second paragraph, it is the most demanding course you'll ever take, and all this kind of stuff. And either they didn't read all the way down, or, but they tended to jump all over. So the students, instead of coming to a course, coming to a classroom, they join a communication consulting firm called Metros. So they join that firm as a junior associate, and they embark on a 12-week training program with the Metros, working on problems for real clients. So stepping away from the simulation for a second, at the very beginning of the course, they're given fairly detailed instructions about what the simulation is and what they're doing, even to the point of putting in a section about metacognitive learning and understanding that by doing this kind of a simulation, mainly to try and prime them as they start to learn, that they could start to think about that too. So there is that section of the course that they get as an email package before the course starts. But once they're into the course, starting the first week, they're no longer talked to as Ryerson students. They're only communicated with as junior associates at a Metros communication consultant. The course has a video for almost everything in order to try and make sure that we can be clear with what's going on. So the course itself, how should I start here? Start with projects. Again, another video that tells them about projects. But the course itself is divided up into 3 main projects. So when they start the course, they're put into a team of 5 other students, which they can access on their My Team page. There's 5 fake people in here and my daughter that I entered in as a test student. But when they enroll in the course, they go to their page, their employment page, their HR page, I'll show you later, and they put in their picture, they put in their bio. They see a page that has their position, their salary, their benefit package, all that sort of thing to try and make it as real as we can. But on those teams, they're going to work on 3 projects. And the projects themselves, I'm going to talk in real detail about the first project and then sort of gloss over the other 2 projects. Because the first project will get across exactly what goes on in the course. So the project number 1 is they're given a client, and they're sent an email from a Metros saying, your first project is going to be to recommend a new website design firm for this client. And we have 3 finalists that you're going to look at. So you're going to look at these 3 website design firms, and you're going to recommend one of them. Now, they have a series of steps they have to follow, okay, that are laid out for them in a diagram. Sorry, there's still some design issues with. There we go. So project laid out. So I'll show the timeline. So anyway, so they have a series of steps they have to go through at the project. So for example, the first thing they have to do is they need to request information about the client and about the 3 design firm companies. Now that request they write, they send it off to the GA, who plays the part of a senior director. The instructor plays the part of the vice president of client engagement. They send it off to the senior director, which is the GA. They read the request, and then we have 4 set responses back, depending on how the request was made. So the request, if it's complete, they ask, the request is clearly written, it's in the right format, they've asked for the right information, they've said exactly what format they want it in, they've said when they want it by, all of the things that make the request perfect, then all the information is sent back to them. If it's missing certain elements of that, maybe the language is not clear. Anyone taught business writing before? No? Well, if you ever do, you ask them to write a request, and you'll read through a whole paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, and you really don't know what they're asking. And they don't ever say, I want this, I want that. They just talk all about what they're doing and all kinds of context things. So anyway, so if that's the case, they're going to get an answer back saying, I don't quite understand what it is you want. And the response itself is the feedback. But it's designed in a way that it comes back as a real response from the person you asked the request from. So there's a certain element of, they have to kind of figure out what the problem is. Now the problem is fairly clear in the first few feedback responses they get. Call them feedback so we can keep clear what they are. But so it may say, I don't understand what format you want this in, or you haven't said what format you want this in. But the way that's what the student has to do is they need to correct their email and send it back again. And if it's still not right, they're going to get another one and they'll have to send it back again. And it becomes just like if they were in the workplace and they were not clear and everything else of what they're doing, they're going to get an email back saying, I don't know what you want. I don't understand what it is. You follow me on that? So that's the feedback. So there's no grade. Okay? There's a point system I'll talk about later, but there's no actual grade. Once they have completed that and they get the information they need, then they need to do an analysis of the client, an analysis of the 3 companies. There's a project planning form in the first project that kind of helps them, guides them as to how they should do their analysis. I'll talk about the content and how they actually learn what to do in a minute. So that may seem like a big gap right now, but in essence, I'll just go through the project that way. They complete the project plan and they send it off to the GA. The GA then, as the senior director, is just looking at it to make sure somebody is not completely lost. And I'll talk in a bit about what they do when it is. Then in week 3, they write a concise recommendation report and they send it off to the senior associate or senior director. The feedback they get in that part of the assignment, or that part of the project, is from the client. And the client will basically say whether they understand this part, they don't understand that part, they maybe don't agree with the argument completely. The feedback is going to come in that sense. And that is something that the GA and the instructor in this case, would actually grade, okay, with a rubric, but the student would never see a rubric and never see a grade. It sees a response that has the problems that are in the recommendation report communicated back to the student as a junior associate. So again, the student themselves is not getting any mark, is not getting a feedback thing. They're going to get, like I said, they get points. I'll explain that in a second. They work through the recommendation report. Then they have to tell the winning firm that they received the contract, which should be hopefully fairly simple. But then they have to tell the 2 remaining firms that they didn't, which is not quite so simple. Okay, and writing a negative message, and then finally post a blog post to the client's blog, sending a copy to the senior director announcing the new firm. And again, all the feedback they get will be in the form of responses. And so whether the communication is acceptable, not acceptable. In the example of the bad newsletter, where they're writing the companies that didn't get it, if they chose a direct strategy that seems kind of curt and not exactly pleasant, the company will probably answer back that they don't want to do business with them anymore and that sort of thing. And they have the option to write them another one and try and get the response back that they want to get. Okay, so that's in essence sort of how how the projects work. Now, each student, I'll say student for this sense. Each student, each junior associate gets a different client in the group. So they're able to collaborate, and we'll talk about how they do that in a second, but they're able to collaborate and talk all they want about the project and what they're doing and their feedback that they're getting, and they don't understand why their request didn't work, whatever, they can ask anybody about it because they all have different clients and they all have different website design firms to research. So there's no plagiarism problems, and they're able to do it, even though they're actually working individually. So in terms of the content themselves, there's 2 ways that they will get, 3 ways actually that they will do the actual learning of the skills and of the theories. One is the textbook that we use for the other course. We contacted the publisher, and the publisher redesigned the textbook to be a professional development guide from a Metros, so that they have a professional development guide that if they have to write a persuasive message, and in the first project it said, you should check out this and you should check out that, and it tells them where to go look for the content. So they need to read about how to make a request. They need to read about how to write a persuasive report. They need to read about how to give bad news, etc. There's also a section called the document library, where it's divided up into all the skills and theories that they need. And if they click on communication theory, which they start with, there's extra readings in there. The idea, what this will end up eventually becoming, because if this goes to a situation, there's 1,000 students per year, or per term in 279 right now. So if this grows to having 6 or 7 instructors per term, every time an instructor puts in a reading, it's shown, every instructor can see it and every student can see it. So we'll end up being this massive library of readings. But what we'll have at the top is a short summary of what's in the textbook. Because if you've ever read a business communication textbook, sometimes they're difficult to get through, and the students complain about being able to pick out exactly what they're supposed to do out of the textbook. So we'll create a text place where they can read about scope, and they can read about purpose, and they can read about every element you can in a page or two. The same way they would in the business world. Nobody's going to give them a textbook of 600 pages when they get to work, usually. I mean, maybe if they were Microsoft or something. But most places, they're not going to get that. They're going to get briefs of some kind that are going to explain things. The other way is we went and created 75, I think 2 minutes is the shortest one, and I think 9 minutes is the longest one, series of videos, 75 videos to cover almost every aspect you can imagine of what they have to know. So in terms of even writing a routine message, there's a short 4-minute video on how to make a request. There's a short 4-minute video on rhetorical strategy for routine messages. There's a short one on format, short one on making sure you have all the elements that you actually want to get across, how to use purpose and scope in your message. Every thing you could think about is broken down into little short video clips, okay, that they have to go and navigate and figure out which ones are applicable to them. Now they're well laid out and well labeled, so it's not difficult to see I'm writing a request email. I need to go and watch these 4 videos or 3 videos. I'm writing a persuasive informal report. I'm probably going to watch 9 or 10 videos on argumentation, on layout, on ethos, all that, on basic rhetoric, all that. So that's the content, and that's how that works. There's stuff like our company, which goes through mission, vision, values of the company, and other things. There's a My Employer Profile, which is just being developed now. But when it is finished, it will have a table that says where they're at currently, and there's a point system for everything that they do. So the points coincidentally add up to 100. So at the end of the course, it's easy to say this is your final mark. But the points are not given where, in a sense, if we say that there's 5 points for the request at the end of the first project, they don't get a 4 out of 5 based on what they do. They get a mark, they get points based on how they complete that part of the project. So for example, let's say they send off the request and they get the middling response back saying, what format do you want it? You know, when do you want it? Basic, simple things like that. But they did ask for the right things. The grammar was right. Everything else was right. If they don't respond back in 2 days, then they would get, whatever, 3 of the 5 points. If they respond back the next day with, I want it in a PDF and I'd like it tomorrow, they can get 5 out of 5. So if they go back and actually complete everything and answer back every single response they get, it's possible to get 100. Okay, it is possible to actually get 100 in the course, which I know is going to send some people in my department into backflips. But if you go through and you imagine somebody writing all of those corrections all the time the same way, why not? You know, we're not teaching creative writing, we're not teaching academic writing, we're teaching professional communication, so are they communicating and are they getting it done? And it's not easy. It's going to be an enormous amount of work. Yep?
Do students end up doing presentations as well?
Yes.
Or only-
Yeah. I'll go through, there's 2 more projects, but I'll talk real briefly about them, but yeah, that's fine. And then the other thing is a table a table of points, a table of where they are based on their points. So as they get so many points, they get a promotion, a raise, They get to another level of points, they get another promotion. If they get to 80 out of 100 points, then they become an associate and they're hired. Okay, yep.
It's huge. Do they collaborate with the teams to work on like certain tasks, or that's just like hypothetical?
No, they do collaborate, and then they're kind of forced to collaborate at the beginning. But the idea is we want them collaborating. It won't work if they're not talking to each other about these projects, even the individual projects. So there's a couple of ways they collaborate. One is there's a message system built into the system where they can send instant messages. Well, it would be instant messages if this was on a phone or on an iPad, and it's made in a responsive way that can be used on any of them. So they can send messages to each other. This will be how they communicate with the senior director. So they would never go to Ryerson email. They would stay within this system. They can attach things to it. They can do everything that way. The other way is there's Adobe Connect's built right into the system. And Adobe Connect is, I'm familiar with that. It's a software that allows you to create meetings. So the 5 people in the team, the GA, who is the senior director, and the instructor, who is the VP, they would all be part of that particular team's meeting setup. So originally, the instructor will call a meeting of the whole class, and discuss projects, just take questions, do whatever they want to do. Adobe Connect works in a way where it's like Skype, where you can see everybody. You can talk voice to voice. So you would call an hour-long meeting. That meeting gets recorded for students that can't make it to that meeting, so they can see it. But the teams are told to call meetings and to include the GA and include the instructor in all of those meetings. And the first one that they set up, the GA will attend and talk to them about how to collaborate on individual projects and tell them, when you get your feedback, it's okay to share what you got back. If you have questions about what happened or you don't understand what's going on, you can ask the senior director, you can ask the instructor, but you can also ask your teammates and talk about it. So it ends up being kind of a group project that everyone has to write their own part of, in essence, because they have different clients. The analysis would all be different, what they're trying to get accomplished to be different. And the instructor, I did a pared down version of this at Conestoga College a few years back, and it was amazing. My biggest fear would be that no one would show up for the meetings, but they were all there, and we did it in Skype, not Adobe Connect, but they were at the meetings, like 80% attendance of people, because they're scared of not knowing what they're doing, and they want to ask the questions, and they want to see what's going on. And the group meetings that were set up, there was a lot of peer pressure on showing up for group meetings too. And they could set them up whenever they want to set them up, so if it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a Thursday night or whatever, they would set them up whenever. And the instructor can decide if you want to drop in or not drop in. And so it's not a case where the instructor is going to attend every meeting, obviously. But that's the way that the communication goes. So they would content-wise, they have videos, they have text, they have a textbook still. They have some mandatory meetings that they can attend live, ask questions, or watch the recorded one, and then there are team meetings that take place online through Adobe Connect. And then the other 2 projects, one is more of a visual project, so they're creating an infographic for a client, and the third project is a formal report for a client based upon the scenario. For the infographic one it's an environmental issue, and one of the scenarios is a company that does wind turbines, trying to put them into place, and they do an infographic to try and convince the population around where the wind farm's going to be that they should have it, and it's a great thing. And then in the next project, it didn't work, and they have to they're going to write a formal report looking at different elements of things they can do, not do, go into different industries, whatever. I'm not explaining it very well, but it basically flows off of the second project. And that last project has a presentation that they create in Adobe Connect, and give out to the rest of the class, whoever shows up to watch it, and that way. That's where I want to get to. There's also a professional development section, which is just being finished now. It won't look anything like this. It'll look like the video and the document one. But it's a series of 8 short writing exercises that they need to complete in order to also be hired. So things like sentence coherence, cohesion, parallelism, basic simple things. So there'll be an exercise, they'll do it, they'll see the correct version. If they want perfect, they go back and correct their own and correct it and go through it. So I think I've covered everything and how the course works. Good, so at least 10 minutes. So I'd love to hear your ideas, feedback. This is going to be offered, like I said, in the fall for the first 40 students. And the research we're going to do off it, we have a separate RA hired, and we're going to do an ethnographic sort of study where we're going to ask them, and we want to try and find out their experience of metacognitive learning, but interview them in a way where hopefully not lead them into question, lead them into things, but try and get an idea of how they felt about the course experience and learning in that way, and asking questions in a way so we can try and determine whether or not ethnographic or whether metacognitive learning took place, but also do some other sort of measurements to see. They have to write a request memo for each project. Did they get better? Like, did they actually get the right response on the third one, as opposed to the first one, and do all the measurements that way. Do measurements on how many people actually redid their work, how many people, did they have less revisions and less redoing of work in the third project or the first project. So all those sorts of measurements to see if we can see how they improved and how they learned through it. So any questions or comments or suggestions? I'd love to hear them. Yep.
As you're presenting this is really, really interesting. I'm thinking of design projects in something like engineering, where depending on the year, sometimes first, sometimes second year students are told to go through the development cycle of an idea, and actually a client who has a project, and they have to meet with the client. So would you call that a simulation as well? Would you say that there are parallels between yours? I mean, yours is developed more fully, and it has the feel of a lived experience, but there are parallels.
Oh, I think so. And I think that's the kind of simulation I've done as well in digital marketing, where I bring in a real company and they solve a real problem. And the company chooses out of the 8 solutions which one's the best and brings them to their office and all that kind of stuff. And those work really well, and they're simulations too, absolutely. But they're missing a certain aspect because it's still in a classroom, it's still, so there's still not quite that. And I'm not saying that every single situation calls for this kind of simulation at all, but there are a lot. And I think, and I have talked to engineering department, mechanical engineering department, and they could see a real need or an avenue where you could create a simulation that's as thick as this.
Well, absolutely, especially the communication in a workplace, say where mechanical engineers will find themselves, will involve many different departments who will be speaking differently to those people. So, yeah, having that kind of simulation would be amazing.
And a simulation for scientific researchers trying to get their ideas out into language that everyone else can understand. That sort of thing. I agree with you.
So you create all the content that's in there?
Yeah.
So you created 75 different videos?
Yeah, we did it in 4 days. We got 7 instructors, 8 hours a day. Like, we had 7 instructors. Certain instructors are really know the material in certain areas. Like, my personal area of expertise is in argumentation. So for me to do my 6 4-minute videos in argumentation took me an hour. Because I could just stand up there and say, we just filmed it very casually, I'm going to talk about the Toulmin model of argumentation, and I just went through the Toulmin model. And then if I'm going to talk about rhetorical appeals, I talk about the rhetorical appeal. Other people are experts. Diane Nubla in the department is an expert in routine messaging and formatting and things and that sort of thing, and she did that. Sheila O'Neill's an expert in presentation skills, so she could stand up there and talk for 5 minutes in presentation skills. So it actually wasn't too painful. There were some areas, and there's still some video areas, meetings. Nobody seems to know how to run a meeting in our department, like in terms of being able to do the videos. So that still has to be filmed. We've got a few more to do that way. But that was the strategy, to try and get it to where you didn't have to actually prepare, because it was in your area of expertise to the point where you could just talk for 5 minutes. So it was harder then to just say, this is what the video is going to be about. In persuasion, we're going to have introduction to rhetoric, rhetorical appeals, basic argumentation, one each on ethos, pathos, whatever, and using it, how format lines up to ethos. That's a, yeah.
In addition to the videos, are students provided with templates? Let's say if they wanted to talk about a team message or templates that they can refer to notes if it's just videos.
No, yeah. The videos say how to format it, and so does the textbook as a professional development guide, and so do the individual little writings in the document library. But that's part of it. They have to go find it. So it's not going to be told to them, which I think will be and I've experienced in the past, the first ones are horrible because people go, I know how to do that. And they write the request and it's awful. And then they have to try and figure out why they didn't get the request answered. Yep. Oh,
Show us part of the video, just so
I knew you were going to say that and I only put mine up there and
I will see those.
just don't judge them too hard. Okay. I wish I'd put up John Shigas. He's so much better. Do a really short one then. Do ethics. I can't remember if it's any good or not. Oh, no sound. Sorry. Is there sound somewhere? Anyone know? I don't know this podium. Anyway, I can send you links if you want. We can do that. I can send you a link to a couple of videos. We have a software service called Panopto. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's this one right now is just in the video format. But Panopto, what it'll end up looking like is that video will be in the top left corner, very small, and the PowerPoint that I use displayed big here. Okay, so I'm going through my PowerPoint, but later on I'm going to edit in the slides, so the student will see my PowerPoint slides and me giving the talk. Now, some instructors don't use PowerPoint slides, they use the whiteboard, so we film them in front of the whiteboard, and they just would see the video as this, full screen. But if I use PowerPoint slides, so the PowerPoint slides will set up. Yeah, it was a bit of work to get it in, but the great thing is these videos now can be used in the 279 hybrid course. They can be used all over the place. So it wasn't hard getting the funding.
It's so scary. It's insane.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of cool that way. Yep.
Just a comment. Well, actually, two comments. The first one is that on the menu for all the videos, the word brief is misspelled. You probably noticed that eventually anyway. I just.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is still a draft.
Yeah, it's in progress. But more importantly, something that I find really interesting about this course model as a simulation is that it seems to take out many of the processes and structure like quizzes and essays and things that really disincentivize coursework for students in a more traditional course model, because this course replaces that stuff with an environment and tasks and repercussions that seem more relevant to their chosen field, which is professional communications. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah,
We're really interested to see how it does.
Yeah, me too. I hope it works out. Yeah, thank you.
This is a really fantastic course. I'm curious, is this intended entirely for online delivery, or is there a significant component of human interaction between the team members?
It's online delivery, but they're all on campus. It's not a
Right.
distance ed course,
Right.
so they will probably, I'm sure, connect. You know, they have Adobe Connect to do it virtually if they want to, but I would believe that they will get together, especially when they get to the group project at the end.
Is there a portion that involves live contact with the instructor, or is this
No.
supposed to happen in the online environment?
Yeah, it's only in the online environment. We debated having an opening session, but I think I'd like to try it purely simulated where they don't even, to them that person's the vice president
Right.
and the GA is the senior director, and they don't get that connection of it's just a professor playing,
Right, so you don't want to basically break the fourth wall. as
Yeah,
it were.
and if we
That
find
concept.
out in the first offering that that's, we really need that opening session or something, then we'll do it. But we'll roll the dice and see what happens with doing it totally online
Will you
first.
have a debriefing session where you sort of pull the curtain back, or?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the research we want to do. Hopefully we can incentivize them enough to want to talk about the course and what they did and how it worked out. And you know, how did they feel they experienced the learning of it, and did they sense that what they were doing by the end of the course was better because they weren't getting so many rejections, if you want to put it that way, or requests for more information or whatever, then do that.
Thank you so much. I would be really curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah. That'd be good. Yep.
Your thoughts about the differences, if any, between the 40 students out of 1,000 who are eager to kind of try it, who's kind of signed up, and everybody who kind of eventually will think that might be successful and kind of, like, do you see any?
I don't think it'll ever be everybody.
Okay.
I think it'll always be you want to do it this way, because this way was definitely not for everybody. There's lots of students that want to learn and there's nothing wrong with,
Agreed.
the way the course is taught now is great. This is just a different experimental way of doing it. I'm not saying it's better or worse or anything. It's just kind of interesting and fun.
We've reached our time.
Okay.
So we want to thank Robert Clapperton for his wonderful presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.